He's been a musician, a magician, a writer, an artist, a pop culture lecturer, a filmmaker, an escape artist, photographer, sideshow fire eater, ad agency art director, carnival pitchman, a model, typographer, stand-up comic, designer, publisher, and the list just goes on and on. He's done so much in his life, and he's still going strong. It's just. He's a truly talented individual. I'm so glad to have him on the show. I want to share with you a couple of my first experiences with Jim Steranko's work. When I was a little kid, my mother used to take me to an open-air flea market in Queens, and I always tried to find comic books. And I remember we were just about to leave this flea market, and I had about $5 in my pocket, and we were getting close to where the parking lot was, and there was a dealer, some type of comic book dealer. He was set up, and he had a couple of boxes, and I thumbed through his boxes, and I came across this comic book that looked so different from everything else I saw in his entire display that I grabbed it, and it turned out to be Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. #1, which I didn't even realize I didn't know who Jim Steranko was. I was a little kid. I didn't know much about the artists or writers that wrote and drew the comic books. But I was drawn to this comic book even as a child, and it stood out. It was so different, and I think it's the graphics that he used and the perspective and the design that he brought into comic books, which was, I think, severely lacking beforehand. Then, as I got into the comic book business in the mid-'90s, I started running the Big Apple Comic Convention here in New York. Our first show, we had as our guest of honor Jim Steranko. And for those of you who don't know Jim knows exactly what he wants, and he's a very, very confident person. And I remember when he was telling us what he wanted for the show, we had a separate room set up for him, and he wanted easels set up so he could put up his artwork. He wanted a security guard at the door, which we had, and I didn't understand exactly what was the meaning behind all this. Why we had to go so crazy with all these different things. But then when I saw it set up, it was perfect, just the way he had planned it. What he was doing was he'd have somebody at the door, a doorman. I shouldn't even call it a security guard, as a doorman. He would let about 10, 15 collectors, fans, come into the room, and in the room he'd have laid out on all the tables his artwork prints, and on these easels paintings and a variety of different types of pieces that he drew and painted over the years. And he'd sit and spend 10, 15 minutes talking to these people and answering their questions and going over whatever they wanted to talk about. And I remember during the day it was really busy and chaotic, and I took about 5 minutes. I stole myself away into the room where he was doing this, and it was so wonderful. It was peaceful. It was calm. It was quiet, and it was great to hear him telling these stories about his experiences in the business. Truly, I can't say enough about him. He's just a great guy, and I'm really glad to have him on the show.
Welcome, Jim.
Jim, I hope that was okay.
Thanks, Vinny, but you forgot to get me those dancing girls.
Yeah, I did forget the dancing girls. I think Mike was working on those, and they fell through. Blame that on Carbonaro.
They're on the way.
Hey, good to be here with you on the Zone today.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us, Jim. I once again, I know you worked on comic books, but you've been so busy in other areas. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're working on currently?
Well, I'm always doing design work, book covers, posters, other jobs that I feel offer a challenge to me. And just recently, I did a couple of pieces, wrote a few comic articles for Jerry Wiest's upcoming 100 Greatest Comics. Yes. Jerry produced the big Ray Bradbury bio a couple of years ago. Mm-hmm. And when he was developing this book, he asked me to come aboard and contribute a couple of pieces.
And what stood out to you as some of the most important comic books that came out over the last 60, 70, 100 years?
Well, it was a peculiar thing because maybe 10 years ago, I got an idea for a piece called 10 Comics That Rocked the World.
Right.
And it's really difficult to find comics that actually changed the medium. I'm not talking about the first issue of The Flash or, a number of other characters, Hawkman, they were important in their own right, but they didn't change anything. Mm-hmm. And when Jerry did the 100 comics, many of the books that were on my list of 10 were in his list, like Mad number 1, for example, or Action 1. Well, that knocked out a bunch of my choices, and I didn't want to duplicate.
Right.
So I had to come up with 10 other books not on his list, and that was a tough one. But what you need to do is really get the book to check out that list of 10. And I have a kind of historic overview that tells you, why they should be on everybody's list to take a look at, and exactly how they changed the medium. But one thing that I did do in that book in the intro was recast the ages of comics.
Right.
How do you feel about that, Vinny?
It sounds intriguing. I'd like to know what your reasons were for doing that. I often look at the Golden Age, Silver Age, and now Bronze Age and Modern Age, and then they also started a Victorian Age and the Platinum Age, and then they have the Atomic Age. What did you do differently?
Well, first of all, those are all nonsense ages, because metal, like silver and platinum and tin and iron, have really no correlation to comic books at all.
Except for the staples, I guess that's a good point.
Exactly. They're just little pieces of tin. So I thought it would be much better to... Now, we're not talking about a tree, that nothing happens to. If you're talking about something, a piece of stone, and the ages of it, you can use this kind of terminology, but comics have a very colorful background, and I thought it would be appropriate to name the ages after the historic reference points that they refer to. For example, if I said to you, what's comics' Iron Age? It wouldn't make sense. You wouldn't know. But if I said, what's the Marvel Age? You know that it has to be somewhere up to 1961, with the beginning of the publication of the Fantastic Four.
Right. So that's true. That's true.
I thought that these guys got together initially, maybe...
we have a caller.
Maybe well-meaning people who wanted to do their best, but I think we could do a little better, and I decided to jump in and rename those ages of comics. Go ahead, caller.
Hey, Jim, are you ready to take a call? Jamie from Boston. Jamie.
Hi, guys. Thank you very much for taking my call.
Sure.
Jim, first of all, this is a big treat for me. And Vince, thanks for sending that email around this afternoon. Without that, I would have forgotten to tune in.
That's great. I'm glad you got it.
But I guess my question for you, Jim, was... as someone who's done so many different things with the medium, trying to, with your experiment and trying to tell a whole story in one picture, with that Shadows, the Silk Stockings killer piece, and everything you did with the Foom magazine and whatnot, I was wondering what you thought of how a lot of times today in modern comics, people are trying to make more comics more and more like movies, with or the experience of a comic like the experience of going to the movies, with the examples of Marvel trying to make the Marvel Scope books with the staples on the top so it opens up sideways, or as your friend Mr. Simmons, the first guest, mentioned the comic book Red, which was by Warren Ellis. It had a lot of more horizontal panels in it to get that movie experience. I wondered if you think that's something that's good for the medium, or whether you think it's kind of like a waste of time and people should just stop trying to make comics into something else and just be happy with what they are.
Thanks for the question, Jamie.
That's an excellent question, Jamie. And I think it's good for comics when it works. The things that you just cited, I think, are essentially gimmicks, but I think they may pave the way for some more serious storytelling. And this is an aspect that I think is severely diminishing over the last decade or two. I think that we've lost the aspect of narrative storytelling in comics, and going more toward the graphic or the pictorial or the single image. And that takes us away from the form, because storytelling is always the heart of comics. You mentioned and I was laughing, telling a story in a single image. That was an experimental concept that I developed years ago, and I just did one recently for DC in their Catwoman collection. I did an image in the back of the book that is very much like the Silk Stocking Killer. But I do think it's important to adapt the aspects of other storytelling mediums, whether it's literature, film, even games, and apply them to comic art so that we can expand that form.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Jim, tell me a little bit about your experiences in the film world, because I realize you've worked with some of the foremost directors of our time. Can you tell us a little bit about what you did? What you're doing?
About 3 years before Raiders of the Lost Ark was made, I got a call from George Lucas, and apparently George had seen some of my pulp-related work, and he explained this character that he wanted some production illustrations developed, and he subsequently took those paintings around and finally to Paramount and sold the project on them. And I remember after George after he shot some of the initial scenes over in Spain of Indy, I remember I got a call from his assistant, Carol Titleman, and she said, "Jim, you won't believe how much Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones looks like your paintings." So, I think he made a good choice.
Yeah, I imagine that's so. That's a fantastic story. I like that. I've got to ask this question. When you look at today's comic books, which stories are you? Is there anything you're reading right now, or anything you find interesting in the comic book world right now?
Yes, I think two of my favorites are the books done by Mike Mignola, the Hellboy books, for example. Yeah, and work done by David Mack. It's almost like Mack has picked up where I left off.
David's a brilliant artist, storyteller, writer. He really is.
Yeah.
He does a comic book called Kabuki, for those of you who are not familiar with David's work, and you can find those in trade paperbacks and graphic novels in any comic book store.
I agree with you. I think he is a brilliant creator and also very experimental. It's difficult to predict exactly what he's going to do in any book, and I think that surprising aspect is good for comics.
Jim, in the last 2 minutes that we have left, and it's unbelievable how the perception of time seems to fly, but we'd really like to have you back on. Can you tell us a little bit about the scholarship fund, Steranko Spirit of America Scholarship Fund, at the School of Visual Arts in New York City, and how that program came together, and how people can find out more about it?
Well, after 9/11, I think all of us felt that we needed to do something, and I wanted to do something special and produced a print that visualized or encapsulated the history of Captain America. Captain America is, of course, the personification of American patriotism, and all of the money, no skimming, every cent that print earns is going into a 9/11 scholarship fund for the victims or the children of victims from the attack. And what my hope is to put those people through art school, and whether they want to be sculptors or musicians or perhaps even comic artists, and they wouldn't have the opportunity to do that, considering the tragedy and perhaps a dead parent or something, I think we can help those people achieve their dream. That's what it's all about. Now, you can get those prints through Diamond or at your local comic shops, and they're really beautiful. I call it the quintessential Captain America image.
Yeah, it is truly a beautiful print. I just saw it recently, and it's gorgeous. It's quintessential Jim Steranko also. You did a great job on it.
Jim, this has been such an honor and a pleasure to have you join the Comic Zone on our show here. And if anybody wanted to send you a note or visit you, do you have an online site or a contact email or anything, Jim?
Well, I've got a site going up at www.steranko.com. And people can email me there. And, anytime you need me, just give me a call, and I'll be back on the show.
Thanks so much, Jim. That means a lot. And have a very happy holiday season and a happy New Year.
Happy holiday to you guys and all your listeners, too. Thanks, and
thank you very much, Jim.
Thank you very much, Jim.